Go ahead.
Good evening. I'm Eric Weflin, Pendleton resident, Madison County taxpayer, also an architect and principal with RQAW, and we've been in the process of doing a jail study, and the initial step, planning process and data collection, we've completed. So what we want to share tonight is kind of an update on where we are with the study and give you some information that hopefully informs the discussion that we're having. A big focus of what we want to talk about tonight is the housing, the operational deficiencies. So from a housing standpoint, the classification, the projections, how many beds are likely needed for a facility for Madison County, operational deficiencies. So from a design standpoint, what works and what doesn't work, how easy is the facility to operate, how efficient is it, how safe is it, what is observation like in a facility like that? Obviously, that's a critical component to facility design like this. And then specialty support. One of the things that we want to talk about and focus on for a facility like a jail is the difference between where we were 15 or 20 years ago, where the role of the facility was simply to house individuals until it was decided whether they were going to prison or home. That has significantly changed. They're tasked with being medical care, mental health. There's a different requirement today, rehabilitation, GED, NA, AA, etc., that is performed in the facility. And does the facility that was designed 30 years ago align with that mission today? So we want to talk briefly about that. Data and projections, just very briefly from a county standpoint, you can see generally speaking, the trend is pretty flat from a population standpoint, goes down very little over the next 20 years. That's not a significant indicator of future need, but it's just a component to the discussion that we want to make sure is on there. Average daily population, this is the jail data, the jail population. So you see two lines on there, capacity and classification threshold. The capacity, the rated capacity is 207 beds. As you can see, back to 2000, every year is over that line. And that's just the average. That doesn't show your peak days or your peak months. That's just the average. Another really important thing to consider is classification threshold. For those of you that don't know, classification is the assigning of individuals to certain blocks in a facility based on certain criteria. The obvious one being males and females have to be separated by violent offenders and non-violent offenders, etc. So the classification threshold is typically considered 80% of the rated capacity, because you're never going to have the perfect mix of individuals to fill every bed perfectly in the facility. So at 80%, you're technically full. And as you can see, you're significantly over that for the last 20 years. This is just a simple projection. We're not trying to get fancy with numbers. We can make, people can make numbers describe anything that they want. We're simply taking a very simple projection over the course of 20 years and looking at what that likely projected number might be. So this is 2000 through 2020, or through 2020, projected out to 2040. You can see a slight increase. If you notice that 2020 had a significant drop, everybody knows that that's because of COVID. So you were dealing with a pandemic. People were removed through the facility quickly. Certain people were let out of the facility. So you see that drop. So if we look at that projection by taking out 2020, the line goes up a little bit. Further, if we look at a current trend, a more recent trend, 2010 to 2019, that number goes up significantly. It's a steeper line. So that's a more limited look at just the last 10 years. So we take all of this into consideration. Nobody's suggesting that we have a crystal ball or that we're going to know exactly where you're going to be 20 years from now, but we can look at the data from the previous 20 years. Further, number of bookings, you look at kind of a trend line that includes 2020, you take that out and it flattens out. You look at the last 10 years and it goes up. So again, just trying to take what information we can from the data and be informed about what that means. Average length of stay, that's critical, because the longer someone stays in a facility, obviously, the higher the average daily population, or the potential for a higher average daily population is directly related to the length of stay. So we look at that and project it out. It is only a 5-year trend, admittedly, but the trend that we're looking at there is up. If we take out 2020 and look at it, you still see that the trend is up. Male versus female bookings. An important takeaway from this is that 25% of your population is female. Back when this facility was designed, I bet that the sheriff and others involved in the facility would tell you that there was maybe 3 or 4 females, or maybe it was 2 or 3 or 5% of the population that was in the facility at the time. Now, again, it's 25%. What does that mean? Well, it means from an operations standpoint, you're dealing with all the same classification challenges with the female population as you are with the male population. So the number of blocks that you need, the number of beds that you need to separate that population is absolutely critical for operations. Population breakdown, sentenced versus pretrial. Again, you can see here that from a sentence standpoint, about 10% of your population is sentenced, so your average daily population is going to be higher. Total booking charge count, crimes, types of crimes, the seriousness of the crimes that are being committed by those that are being housed in the facility. If you look at 18 and 19, you can see that your A misdemeanors and your level 6 are the peaks in that graph. New criminal cases filed. This is just from public courts, indiana.gov. You can see that level 6 felonies are 20% of the crimes that you're dealing with. So again, seriousness of the crimes is significant. Misdemeanor A, felony 6. You can see that the trend is increasing. Look at the level 6 felony increase from 15 to 19. So again, what does that mean? The average length of stay increases. That has a direct effect on the average daily population. We look at counties of similar populations and look at the beds per 1,000 as a metric for you to consider. Not every county is the same. No one's suggesting that this is a perfect science, but it is, for comparison's sake, I think a critical thing to consider. Madison County has 1.6 beds per 1,000. Obviously, Hendricks County, Johnson County, Delaware County are all recent projects that we completed, so those numbers are taken into account. The new numbers are taken into account that raised that average, but the average of those beds by county, less Madison County, is 3.64. So then we look at some calculations, not just linear graphs, but look at some calculations. Here you can see that based on this calculation, we take the number of admissions, how many are actually booked, the average length of stay, currently 20 days, gives you about a need of 350 beds. We have to properly classify that as described. That gets you up to 438 beds. We did another calculation with that 3.64. That gets you up to 455 beds. Classification was included in those designs, so we don't need to gross it up. And then a rule of thumb that we're aware of, that we hear about when we talk to people around the country, is 4.5 beds per 1,000. That would get you up to 562. So I won't run through all the data summary, but basically you've got some projections that are 325, 338, 444. We did those calculations as well. Based on that, it's recommended that the county provide 400 to 450 beds for your 20-year need, based on the data that we've evaluated at this point. Any questions about that?
What was the 562 number prior to
that? Was a rule of thumb. So it's a number that we hear when people talk about how many beds does a particular county need. Sometimes you'll hear 4 or 4.5 per 1,000 population, and that would put you up at 562, and no one's suggesting that. So we're down at the 4 to 450.
When was this study finally completed?
This is still in process.
So when was it actually provided to the county, and even in summary form?
Last week.
All right. So how many people on the council received it before today? I never received any information until later this afternoon.
Again, due to the Indiana open door law, we receive information in public. So that's what we're doing right now. We're receiving the information.
You're not entitled to an email, or I think it was emailed to us today around 4 o'clock, and I worked till 5. That gave me 1 hour to look at this information ahead of the meeting.
But again, out of respect to our guest here, let's again, the council will have time to discuss this, but let's go ahead and make sure we get through the presentation so that he's not here during all of our arguments.
You got a lot of data, and I'm trying to follow you. Is this the number? Oh, not left. Hey, that's not right. Where'd it go?
They'll bring it back.
I don't know. Where's that? This study that you did was locally here. This number's for Madison County, for the new jail, right? You got a population of men, women, right? The kind of you figured in your study. Mental health and drug treatment. Is this in with the beds that count in this? Or is this the drug treatment? Did you do a study on the drug treatment for the county? For like how many beds that would be in for the jail?
So total population, and then taking into account certain classification requirements that include things like, so there are rated beds, so we don't count group holding in these numbers, but we would include like medical beds, medical isolation beds. Those would all be part of that number, that range, 400 to 450.
So we don't have a number how many you would suggest that we would for drug treatment?
Yep, and there's some information in here that I'll get to here in a second that breaks out, that breaks down that to some extent. Now, the thing to keep in mind is that from a study standpoint, we are not in design. So there's a whole other design phase that would happen after the study's completed, which we haven't completed. This is an update. So we've done a lot of work, but there's other things, and I've got some next steps that describe the other things that we're going to do to finalize the study.
Thank you, Eric.
Yep. So existing space evaluation, I won't go through all of this. I'll point out some things. The controls there that we see are antiquated. There's instances of false indicator lights showing that certain doors are closed and secured when they're not. So obviously in a facility like this, that's a challenge. The Sally port, you can see a single file, and the doors are too small for emergency vehicles, so things like an ambulance can't get into that space, which we've heard from a medical standpoint. You know, care is critical. Access to care quickly is critical. There's lots of instances of water infiltration, and you'll see, you know, from both the exterior and the pipes coming into the facility. There you can see a shower that has a curb. That is the main changing room and intake and booking. That's not ADA accessible. So those considerations were not, were not part of the design originally. You can see a body scanner there where the ceiling is actually cut to accommodate the body scanner. Probably most important about this picture is that is an office that was converted into the body scanner. So now the people that occupied that office are actually up on the detention level within the facility. Kitchen equipment doesn't always work. You can see cart storage out in the corridor. There's no room to expand laundry. So as the facility is originally designed for a lower number. We're at 207. We're always higher than that number. So the amount of laundry that you're doing, it's basically running 24/7, would need to be expanded, and there's no room to do that. I can run through. I just passed a slide that had video court being held in a multi-purpose space, and there's not dedicated spaces for those types of things. That's where other staff uses take place. It's where other programming functions for the facility take place. When we get into the plan of the facility is stacked, so it's vertical. Vertical circulation is really challenging for a facility type like this. And up on the upper level is where the inmate workers are housed, but the kitchen and laundry are on the lower level, so they're as far away from their work as they can be. You have outdoor rec space that has screening there that has been, pieces have been taken and used to create weapons. You can see a curtain there that is used in the top image. That is for sight and sound separation, so that you can properly classify that detention area. Obviously, a curtain is probably not the best means for sight and sound separation. Observation is challenging. There's a view from a secure corridor looking up into a space where inmates are housed. You can see the limited view into that space. So again, lots of documentation about the challenges of that. Similarly with the plan, like I said, on the lower level, you've got your kitchen and laundry. You move up to the main level, very limited holding for intake and booking. There's basically 2 group holding spaces. And then the brown area in the upper left of that plan shows an area that's used for isolation. And that's difficult to observe. And there's not enough, and there's no negative air. So over the last year and a half, negative air, basically not sharing air throughout the facility during a pandemic would be a good thing to have, and this facility does not have that. So from a jail inspection report, standard report, I mentioned the kitchen equipment, medical services you've heard about tonight, lots of plumbing issues, overcrowding, no negative air from medical, inadequate storage, inadequate lighting, the security locks and doors don't all function properly. There needs to be more space for attorney-client interaction, programming space, and the facility is not ADA accessible. We can spend hours talking about the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing issues in the facility. I'm sure with the money that you've all appropriated over the years to put Band-Aids on the facility and do some fixes, that you're aware of a lot of the challenges there. One of the big things was, so is the existing facility, is it possible that that existing facility can accommodate everything that's needed? And I would say that for everything that I'm aware of that facility needs in terms of space, programming space, attorney-client space, intake and booking, pre-processing, et cetera, you need a lot of square footage. So what are the opportunities there for additional square footage? We understand that the facility was originally designed to go vertically. So we evaluated it structurally, and it is cost prohibitive to do a vertical expansion of that facility. The design of the shear walls for that facility are inadequate per current code. There's a lot of work that would need to be done to enhance that, and the time that it would take to upgrade a facility for the things that we saw from a structural design standpoint would make it time and cost prohibitive. I mean, you'd have to just constantly move through that building and move people out. You're already short beds as it is. You don't have space to give up. The amount of time that it would take would be significant, and the cost would be significant, and it would be a requirement. We would be modifying the load on any of these members by more than 10%, therefore we have to update it to current code. The amount of work that we'd have to do to bring it up to current code is significant. Further, the site is landlocked. Everybody's familiar with the site. You've got roads on 2 sides. You've got the river on a 3rd side. There's really not a north side to the facility. There's nowhere to expand out on that building as well. So what do we do differently today from a design standpoint? There you can see one of our control rooms from a recent facility, significantly different than what you're dealing with today. One of the primary advantages of the way that we design our central control is you can see that port in one of the windows. That's a direct connection to the day room where people are being housed. So when necessary, whether there's a hostile situation or some other circumstance within that facility, you can access it through that port. Here's a view of a day room looking up at the mezzanine level. You can see the cane screens on the upper level to prevent people from being helped over the rail or harming themselves. There you see the port that accesses the day room directly below. This central corridor is critical. I'm going to show you a plan here in a second. But this is where, along this corridor, immediately adjacent to the housing blocks, are support areas. So think about medical exam rooms, programming spaces, classrooms, meeting rooms, etc. When inmates have that direct an access to the things that improve their rehabilitation, help create therapeutic spaces, etc., that work will actually get done. Right now, it's such a challenge to get anyone from point A to point B in the existing facility that it's hard to do. The number of staff that it takes to get people vertically through that building is significant. So here's a housing pod that we would propose. Again, we talked at the beginning about the potential of 400 to 450 beds. You can get 250 up to 300 beds around one control point in a design like this. So what that means for Madison County would be that you would have one complete pod like this, and then at least part of another pod. So there's a second level. You can see it's tiered. The day rooms are 2-story spaces. The cells are stacked. You have observation from the middle. What we would talk about doing in order to control costs is understanding that we only need, in that 400 to 450 beds, would be to create a base bid in that second pod. So you have one full pod, let's say 250, and then in the second pod, 150 beds. But in the future, the county would be able to add day rooms around one control point. What that means is that you don't have to add staffing as you add those from an observation standpoint. Your expansion isn't somewhere else. It's immediately around that control point. This is Hamilton County. We did their expansion. They built out half their pod. You can see what the other half looks like. You wouldn't have to build it out to this point. That obviously has a concrete floor throughout, but it's a good representation of the opportunity that you would have to add future space. We went through a programming exercise with the sheriff and the jail. Right now, you currently have 59,000 square feet in the existing facility. Where we're at today is 102,000-ish square feet with 15,000 square feet of future expansion. So the entire facility would be in the 117,000, 118,000 square foot range. We would be talking programmatically initially about 6 padded cells to help support mental health efforts there, 20 medical isolation cells, 4 group hold. Right now you've only got the 2. So that's just some summary that was to the point that was asked earlier about some breakdown of beds. Here's an example of Wabash County. The only reason that we show that, it's only a 1-pod facility, but there is the opportunity up here in this corner, and I realize it's hard to see from there, but we can share these plans with you. There is a court built into the facility right here, so if you wanted to do something like that, you could. This blue area down here is the sheriff's office, intake and booking. The blue, you can see the amount of dedicated medical and medical isolation in that facility and observation. Kitchen is here. Immediately across the hall in these 2 gray boxes are the inmate workers that are immediately adjacent to the areas that they work. This orange area here are those support spaces that I described that include like programming and attorney-client meeting rooms and those types of things, and then housing and rec around one control point. Hendricks County is a 2-pod solution that's under construction right now in Danville that we designed. It's a 552-bed facility, 8 padded cells. Similarly, sheriff's office out to the left, 2 pods, centrally located, intake and booking and medical in blue with kitchen and laundry. In the future, when they want to expand, they just add another pod out to the east, and sometime in the future, if they ever want to expand, they add another pod there. Our next steps are finalizing the regional jail questionnaires. These are requirements of the law that was passed a couple years ago. Implications of housing inmates out of county is a question we need to ask. Some staffing and operational cost evaluation of a new facility versus the existing. Diving a little bit deeper into the 1-day snapshot of the desired classification. So to further expand, Councilman Vaughn, on your question about how much of each thing do we need, we're going to dive deeper into that. Right now we don't have a site, so we would be evaluating sites as those come along. And then total cost analysis would be a final component of that. Just to put it in finalized form, there are some, I think, estimates that can be shared of where a facility like this might be, and then some continued discussions with other justice functions, courts, probation, et cetera, just to kind of look at do we have the types of spaces in this facility that support and accommodate those other components.
Eric, I'm trying to think what county when I went through with the sheriff, me and the sheriff, what county was that? Hancock? Yes. Is that where we're at?
Yeah.
What's the population of Hancock? What's the population of Hancock? Sorry, I've got a lot of things running through my head.
Of the jail?
No, what's the population of that county?
Of Hancock County?
Yeah. I guess what I'm saying is you've been multiple things. What?
Quite a bit less than ours.
Yeah, I don't know it off the top
So
of
I
my
can
head.
get a vision. What county would you compare this to that you're in doing work as an architect? Is this compared to maybe Hancock, the size that Madison County would be?
Yeah,
kind of like that?
yeah. And from a housing standpoint, Hendricks County is very comparable. The sheriff's office component and training component that they had, I think, would be different. Some of the support spaces that they had, let me see if I can back up real quick. So you can see those orange areas along that central corridor in the housing area. That's a significant amount of programming space. So they went way above and beyond when it came to rehabilitation, focus on programming and classrooms and those types of things. So there's some extra square footage here, but this is a two-pod scenario just like the one you saw at Hancock County. And at Hancock County, they did exactly what I'm describing, where they built out one completely and then part of a second one, and they have leftover space. Hamilton County did that as well.
So that's what you're suggesting here.
What type of acreage would we be looking at for a facility that you project?
15 is probably a good target.
And that's adding how many pods? If we, in the future...
Expansion.
Or how much the expansion, what would that...
Well, you're looking at, I mean, a facility like this is in the 3-acre, 2.5 to 3-acre footprint. So, I mean, it depends on parking, what other facilities you want out there, you know, what outbuildings do you want there. I mean, on 15 acres, you could add multiple pods after the initial 2.
Okay.
I mean, your future would be safe with 15 acres. That's a lot of land.
Right, okay.
Now, we did visit the Hancock, and I noticed when we were walking through the one corridor where you had, I think you had a picture of it, where the maintenance was able to do service to those pods from the corridor instead of being inside. That's pretty different. That's unique there.
Yeah. So what you're describing is the area in beige around the housing pod. So this area right here, that's outside of the secure perimeter. It's wide enough to get a scissor lift through there. So you have access to all the mechanical, electrical, plumbing that serves the detention areas. So you don't have to lock anyone down to do maintenance. You don't have to worry about dropping a screwdriver. You don't have to wait for certain times to do maintenance. It's easily accessible. Maintenance that's easily done gets done, generally speaking. So from an investment standpoint, that's a key component because it protects your investment.
And the workers.
Yes.
How far has Hancock been done? Are they
Months. I mean, I would like within the next month and a half, they're going to be done. They're going to spend probably 2 to 3 months training and, you know, working through getting it operational.
Quick.
So yeah, within the next few months, they'll be occupying that facility.
How much did their workforce increase from their start to this new building?
They were able to, at Hendricks County as well, we were able to design a facility. So in Hendricks County, they went from a 300-ish bed facility to, like I said, nearly 600 beds, 550 beds, and they didn't increase their staffing at all. It's more operationally efficient. They have their existing facility is very similar to Madison County's in that it was multiple detention levels, so a lot of vertical movement, and that level of inefficiency is, you know, we're able to overcome that by the way that we design a modern facility. So we've actually been able to design several facilities recently where staffing was neutral. Now that assumes that they had the adequate staffing, you know, for their existing facility. I guess what I'm saying is that if somebody was understaffed with their existing facility, then they would be understaffed for the new one typically.
So you compete with other architects, right? You compete, do you know other architects that do their construction? Is this the best way to go, or how you can?
I would say that from a housing pod standpoint, we're all very similar in the approach. I mean, you will see rear mechanical chases designed like this. I mean, I think that there are differences, and I'd be happy to sit down and talk about the differences to approach. But generally speaking, a housing pod like that is what you see.
Eric, in your opinion, you see some jails have built administrative facilities at the courts. And the way I understand it, you're the expert. So I'm not, you've seen a lot more of this. I'm just trying to make a good financial decision for this county taxpayers. But give me a comparison in your opinion for putting the court in the jail. That saves a little transport, I've heard, the positive. And the courts, I know Delaware County's like that, went through Delaware County. Would you give me an opinion on that, what you?
I think it depends, county to county. I mean, obviously the opportunity is exactly what you described. From an operational efficiency standpoint, you're able to move people quickly from point A to point B. I think from a safety standpoint, there is a component to moving within a facility versus moving people out to a sally port, getting in a vehicle, driving them some distance, moving them into a courts facility where there's other staff and there's public, et cetera. I mean, so
increase safety too with that?
I would say that there's an opportunity for enhanced safety. It's not to say that it's not safe to do it the other way. It's just to say that there's an opportunity to enhance safety and efficiency and staffing. I mean, the number of officers that you have transporting versus the number of officers that you have managing the population within the facility, or for that matter on the road, I mean, with a budget is something to consider. I mean, for a lot of counties, I think it just comes down to a matter of what are the conditions of the existing buildings where those other functions are taking place? What is the available budget? Is there a means to do it? In Delaware County, they were in a really unique situation where we went over and looked at an existing facility and helped them understand that that existing facility would support those types of operations.
Did you go over there and did anything with Delaware?
We were the architect, and
that's a nice facility.
Yeah.
Sheriff, do you like that facility? Sorry, I don't want to get too. I'm going to ask another question, Paul.
Yeah, let's stick with Derek for now.
I guess what I'm looking at, you did a study here. I get the acreage. The jail site's a big thing. When you did the study, I'm going back to this drug epidemic because we got a huge drug epidemic in this county. I want to make sure we make a decision that we have enough beds, because overwhelmingly the crime is drugs. And I feel like from going over to jail too many times, well, not too many, I'm sorry, seeing too many arrests and keeping an eye on that, just kind of, so they get really sick. So I feel that this county is obviously, we see it out. What would you recommend to help the community, to heal the community, a good number of drug treatment facility? I'm sure there's different sizes on different jail, but to make a dent or make effective for the community.
So the way that we address that is that we make it so that multiple blocks, those pie pieces within these housing pods, can accommodate programming within the day rooms, and also so that there are step-down units and recovery blocks within all of those. So in any one of those pods, you'll see 10 or 11 pie pieces. Each of those pie pieces is a dedicated block. In some of those blocks, you can have movable detention furniture so that they can do programming within that space. We can do different things to enhance that space and make it more therapeutic so that rehabilitation for recovery programs can be better achieved, I guess, within that space. So there are things like that that we take into consideration and are part of our design. Again, we're going to go through, probably a 6-month design period eventually, the county will, and make decisions about things like that, details like that. However, what I can tell you is that the number of beds that we've suggested with the expansion around one control point accommodates your concerns in terms of number of beds and availability of specific rehabilitation, recovery, those types of programs.
Is this jail study completely complete?
No.
What percentage is it?
75%. So here are the things that I talked about that are next steps. A handful of them, 3 or 4 of them, are just, in terms of like the population need, the size of the facility need, Never mind, I mean, at this point, it's as much about what you don't have in an existing facility and how hard it is to operate, how hard it is to maintain. The different places that we saw staff working and being on a call for court, you know, they were in indoor rec. Staff was in indoor rec watching court because they might have needed to testify in this particular case. And then downstairs, away from housing, you had people that were in court, inmates, and then you have staff next to. So anyway, my point is that there are enough challenges there, and we know from a population standpoint that you've been, for 20 years, just this population, jail population, has been over the rated capacity every year, significantly.
When would the jail study be complete? 100%, where we can see it fully studied? A majority of the stuff that we have left to do can be done within the next couple of weeks. There are things like, you know, site evaluation. We're not picking out. We are going to help evaluate and pick out sites, but we don't have those yet. So I can't do that evaluation until we have that. So really
That's
you
just
need
part
a
of the
site
process.
before the jail study's over?
Well, I mean, it's just a piece that wouldn't be completed until we have several options to consider and evaluate, and that's obviously a key component when you talk about total cost, because there are things like, very practical things like utilities and infrastructure and things like that that have to be considered on a site. They can't be evaluated until you know exactly where you're looking.
Okay.
And we can't look at sites until we have this information that was just completed last week, which is how big of a facility do we need to talk about? And what are the issues with the existing facility?
Okay, thank you.
Yep,
Anything else for us?
I don't think so.
Okay. We also have, as part of this presentation, we have Jack Krause here, and we have Brian from Baker Tilly. I know another part of this is budget. We've heard the size we need. I don't know if either of you would want to talk about the financials that we've, forecasted, the budget we forecasted. Do you think we're in the ballpark? You knew that question was coming.
Yes, of course.
Thank you. So I guess it's time to answer the question. Initially, when I first came down here, of course, we had to start kicking the can in some direction as far as size, cost, need, and so on. And in talking to the sheriff and commissioners and so on, it was pretty well determined that something in the 400-bed category will probably be the resultant study. So there was two options at that point. One, we quickly realized that, and the study has validated this, that the existing jail is not valid, and that you will unquestionably need a new jail in spite of all other options. So then it was my job to take the 400 beds, not yet validated, because the study is now quite honestly validating to that to some degree, and try to project that a year from now to 8 months from now when it's actually bid, along with all the associated costs that go with it. Now keep in mind that we have construction costs, we have soft costs, we have staffing costs, operational costs, and my favorite, coverage of the bond sale. So all of those things have to be imputed in the potential cost when the time comes. To that end, I gave Baker Tilly the construction value at that time, which was several months back, of approximately $64 million for the construction. And to that, I added 30% for soft cost. Now, I will be the first one to admit that the 30 is slightly strong. It's more in probably the 27 or 28% range. But not knowing land costs and a few other odds and ends, probably more practical to take a stronger position on the soft cost. That put the overall cost at roughly $85 million. And that's what was given to Baker Tilly to impute the tax rates. Now, as time moves forward, that meant that I wanted a building that was somewhat in the 110,000 square foot category. This is 117, so once again, fairly close. This says 450 beds. I had 400. As the design moves forward, what's left of the study is not consequential as far as the size and the need. That's already been established in the study. The refinements in the study from here on are more or less statutory requirements of the 1263 bill that he's got to do and finalize the study. It shouldn't make any difference to the realization that you need a jail, and you need a jail in the 400 to 450 bed range. So, and of course, as the design moves along, there will be an ever-going re-estimate, recheck the square footage. You know, a jail is a funny thing. It's not like building a house. You can't decide, your wife can't decide whether you're getting Formica tops in the kitchen or granite. You're going to get Folger Adams locks or Brinks locks, and they're both extremely expensive. One's slightly more expensive than the other, but they're both very expensive. So the way you save money in a jail is its size, for the most part. And that's the only way you're going to save any consequential money. So once you decide on the size is dictated by bed count, then the dynamics pretty well falls forward.
So how much are you you gave before, but I didn't catch your number, what you're thinking now?
Well, I projected the cost of the jail out overall for something in the category of 8 to 12 months. In other words, I took current jail costs and inflated those forward, because today's cost doesn't mean anything as far as this situation. It means something when we bid it. Well, when will we bid it? Well, as Eric said, it'll be at least 6 months before we bid it. So any number of any jail that's built today is not valid, particularly with the inflation rates going on with jails, and quite honestly, most everything else right now.
So the projection you gave a few months ago, you feel like that is still
It's still valid.
valid? Okay.
Now, again, on the bed count, which drives the size, which drives the cost. So it's important for us as we move forward to control those things, because that's what will control the cost.
What was that number?
85 million is 110,000 square feet, 400 beds.
And originally, when we started this conversation, the jail was going to cost in the range of $40 million. Much like the conversation about 6 months ago. And now all of a sudden we're at $85 million. So,
I don't ever remember.
I'm not sure where.
No, I don't remember 40
There's
either,
a
but
40 to 50 million was a rumor last year that was rumored. That was, that's a true statement.
And that's why we have experts here. So
Well,
that
I'm
we're
just
not
saying,
relying
it
on
was a
rumor.
true,
Yeah, there's a lot of talk, but
so my question, is there a chance that we can vote on a lit tax tonight, the 0.15, and that not be enough?
well,
We're going to have to come back to the well.
the most important thing for me, prudently for the council to do, is at the very least pass the 0.2, because that gives you the seed money for the future, pays the architects and so on and so forth. You don't have to borrow from one of Rick's other accounts and worry about reimbursing it. Now, as you move forward, let's say that the project goes from 86 to 88. Well, in a lot of instances, that's not a very consequential change. And all of us, including Baker Tilly, has done certain things to hedge a bit. For example, the net average bond rate, I'm sure that Baker Tilly at this point has used a number larger than it might ultimately be. And when you sell the bonds and the bond rate goes down, in essence what it's saying, you can buy more house with less payment. So there's variables. If it's too radical, something will have to give. There'll have to be more money injected in the system.
So basically what I hear you saying, maybe in a roundabout way, that maybe we should, so we don't have egg on our face, we should at least wait for the lit portion of this until we know what the actual lit would be. What would we have to really assess the public for? Because it would be very a hard sale to ask us to come back and increase an additional tax for the jail when we didn't do it right in the first time. So that's been my position, that we should evaluate this before we, it's already been said tonight to get the cart before the horse. Which we probably do, because we have no idea what this is, where this is going to end up, except for what you're suggesting. It could be $90 million, because we don't know what the cost of the inflationary trends are going to be. The cost of construction. We've got the limited supply of electricians and plumbers and all of these people, and how long this project's going to have to wait, because I just did a project, or started a project, supposed to start June the 1st, and it took me from June the 1st until last week to land a plumber and an electrician that would bid the job. And so basically, that's going to be a problem, because we just have a short supply of those kinds of people. So,
Mr. President, I got
Yes.
a question for Jack. Jack, this is your business. You've been doing this for how many years?
Since 1980, so
1980.
almost 50 years.
And when you do this, and we have a project that you come out and you give us your best guesstimate of what these projects are, would you say that that is usually where they fall?
Yes, it is usually where they fall. And I might add that as time moves forward and I get more and more conservative, I hedge my bet more and more, which means that they fall typically under and under and under, maybe to a fault, but far better that than fall over.
Okay. And my next question is, in your expert opinion, if the longer we delay this, do we see construction costs going up?
Oh, God, yes.
So,
It's just a breathtaking.
yeah, I mean, we've heard those numbers, and again, I know there were lower numbers several years ago discussed, and we've seen those numbers grow exponentially because, again, as the sheriff's pointed out on numerous occasions, we see these costs going up each and every year. Every year we don't build, we're taxing the taxpayer more money to pay for the same project, correct?
Yes. And it's not just inflation on the cost of a steel product, cheap goods and steel. It's the concept that in the jail market, there's a limited supply line. There's only so many locks we can buy. There's only so many cells. There's only so many secured ceilings we can buy. And all of those supply people, manufacturers, are in great demand right now. There's a lot of pressure brought to all of them because there's so much of this work going on. So as a result of that, they can command larger and larger amounts of money for the same product, aside from the national, whatever they're claiming it is today, of 5%. So we got more than just basic old inflation going here. We have the concept of the supply line being limited.
Thank you.
Jack, on the project you gave 80-something million, and that's the project, or that's the bill of the jail. What are we looking at? I know this can't include land that we buy. Is that correct?
Now, here's the way I've approached it for the last 20 years, 30 years, whatever. We know statistically that when a jail is built and use a revenue bond, we know so much capitalized interest and all those little component parts that come together to make it $85 million. And one of those parts is 30%, which is a third of $63 million, goes towards architect's fees, capitalized interest, construction manager, land cost, FF&E for the sheriff, and on and on and on. Do you need to know the land cost now? No. But what I need to know is where are the various sites you're considering, what's a good square foot or acreage cost for those, and I simply put it in the budget. You will, however, have to define the land before the architect gets too far down the road, because he has to apply the building specifically to the property.
Okay.
So we're still talking about building and not repurposing another building, much like Delaware County did. Has there been any kind of conversation about the potential of taking an existing building like Delaware County did and repurposing that building? And because the only conversation we're hearing tonight is about building, we're not looking at the Delaware County's jail was $46 million. And they have basically a community justice center inside of that. So you know, man, when you're talking about $86-90 million, and we could do it for 43 by repurposing a building that already exists, that has the square footage in the land, that would be a much wiser use of funds than just, you know, saying the only option is building.
Okay, let's broach that subject slightly. Norway will throw out that option. That's all part of the land pursuit. But let's say we find several buildings. Let's say it's an old factory. There's certain criteria to make the building work. First of all, it's got to have enough height in it. It's got to be 22, 23 feet clear inside the building. If it doesn't do that, you can't stack the cells. So, it doesn't work. We find a school much like Delaware did, okay? We're not going to repurpose the inside of that school for security purposes. Administratively, we might. So we're going to build a pod outside the school and use the school for sheriff space, you know, courts, and so on. And that may still be an option if there's things like that exist. That's all part of that land effort. And if we do find it, and it works, it's advantageous. But you got to be careful when you start fooling with an older building. You save money on one side and you give up function on the other, because you have to keep adapting to the building as opposed to what you truly like to have functionally.
Well, it seems to be working in Delaware County relatively well, and that's you know, that's all. Like $46 million versus 86. I mean, I think it's worth exploring that option.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Is there anything else that you all would like to present as part of this presentation? If not, I'm going to move on to ordinance 2021-8A.